A very warm welcome to you, Shouvik. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Wishing you, wishing you good evening
Very good evening
and
to you.
very good evening. And as you know, uh, I will be face to face with some digital problems. You are already aware of
Okay,
that.
okay. You told
Uh,
me about it. How is your
yes,
laptop now?
my laptop has. I think it is on the verge of shutting down entirely. It
Okay.
was misbehaving last day. It
Oh,
has become a hypocrite today entirely.
okay.
So the only way I can repair the this instrument is by taking it to a nearby shop and asking
Okay.
them what has happened to it.
Oh. Anyway, we,
Okay,
we shall wait for a few minutes so that the participants can join in.
okay, great. All right.
Yeah. Dr. Shouvik, shall we begin then?
Yes, yes, absolutely. It's 7:07 by my clock. So let us begin.
Okay. Sure, sure.
Uh, Let us begin. So
Yeah.
let me begin by first thanking the Department of
No, no,
English and
please wait. I think I'll have to introduce first.
yes,
And by the way, would you be able to shift, rotate the phone because I think the image is tilted right now.
you want me to rotate the phone.
Yeah, rotate it to, yeah, yes, now it's all right.
The problem is in this way I cannot place the phone on the phone stand. That is a
Okay,
problem.
but now you are seen completely tilted. You are tilted on the screen right now.
Yeah,
For
but
the
I cannot somehow place this phone like this. If I could, that would be great. The phone somehow does not seem to fit here properly, does it? Can you see me properly like
now
this?
you are able to see you properly, but there is too much glare from behind, from the light.
There is a glare from the light. Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah,
That's true.
but this is
But
better than before. Now we are able to see you
okay,
straight.
okay.
So, Dr. Shouvik, thank you very much for accepting our invitation to deliver
Thank you
this
so
session at our conference. So, again, very welcome to all of you, all the participants who are present here for the second session of the workshop. I express my heartiest welcome on behalf of the Department of English. So today we are delighted to continue this academic journey with the lecture titled Wordsworth Today, to be delivered by Dr. Shouvik Narayan Hore of the Department of English, the Sanskrit College and University, Kolkata. The theme of this session is both timely and intellectually stimulating. William Wordsworth remains one of the most influential figures in world literature, not merely as a major romantic poet, but as a thinker whose ideas on memory, nature, imagination, childhood, emotion, and the human relationship with the environment continue to resonate in our own age. Contemporary criticism has revisited Wordsworth through new lenses such as ecology, politics, identity, historical consciousness, and textual studies, demonstrating that his works remain remarkably relevant in the 21st century. As modern scholarship suggests, Wordsworth is no longer read only as a nature poet, but as a writer deeply engaged with questions of society, selfhood, history, and culture. So, since we are discussing Wordsworth, we are privileged to have Dr. Shouvik, who has done some significant amount of work on the Romantic poets as well as Wordsworth. I know him ever since our days at the University of Hyderabad as a very committed scholar of literature who is very passionate about literature, and that's the reason why he chooses to work on the areas that he's really interested in, and that he has always done that in his literary career. And he has significant publications to his merit, and his work on the English Romantic poets was very impressively cited in the year's work in English studies published by the Oxford University Press. So the Oxford University Press generally publishes only remarkable works in the respective fields, and his work on the Romantic poets was published in this particular collection. So his presence with us today assures an engaging and insightful exploration of how Wordsworth speaks to contemporary readers, critics, and comparative literary studies. I am certain that this lecture will open fresh perspectives on Romanticism and the continuing vitality of canonical texts in changing intellectual contexts. So now I welcome our very supportive and encouraging head of the department, Professor Indrani Mukherjee, to welcome our resource person. Ma'am? Indrani ma'am? I think you might be muted. Yeah, just a moment. Ma'am will be joining right now. She's already here. Indrani ma'am is here with us. Ma'am, I heartily welcome you to welcome our resource person, Dr. Shouvik. Ma'am, kindly unmute yourself. Your mic is muted. Ma'am, it's okay. Now it's all right, ma'am. It's unmuted.
A very good evening to everyone and a warm welcome to all who have joined this online international workshop on contemporary horizons of comparative literature. It gives me great pleasure to welcome our distinguished guest speaker for today's session, Dr. Shouvik Narayan Hore, whose scholarship and insights will help us to revisit and reimagine a timeless voice in literary history through his theme, Wordsworth Today. I'm sure this topic will enlighten us about how Wordsworth's poetry continues to resonate in our present times across cultures, disciplines, and critical frameworks by recontextualizing his 19th century focus on nature, humanity, and language as a vital response to modern crisis. It seeks to bridge traditional romantic studies with contemporary interdisciplinary analysis of memory, nostalgia, environmental humanities, and ecological criticism. Once again, on behalf of the organizing committee, I extend a warm welcome to you, sir, and we are truly grateful to you for joining us and sharing your expertise with a global audience. We look forward to a very engaging and thought-provoking session. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. So now I invite Shivani to introduce Dr. Shouvik formally, officially to the participants. Shivani? Shivani is my research scholar. Yeah.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I am Shivani, a research scholar at the Department of English and Modern European Languages in University of Allahabad. And on the behalf of department, I extend a very warm welcome to all present here for today's lecture on online international workshop on contemporary horizon of comparative literature. It's truly a matter of great pleasure and privilege to welcome our distinguished resource person, Dr. Shouvik Narayan Hore. Before I formally introduce him, I would like to take a brief moment to acknowledge the constant support and guidance of our respected Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Sangeeta Srivastava, and esteemed Head of Department, Professor Indrani Mukherjee, and that our dedicated coordinator, Dr. Eliza Sebastian, whose efforts have made this online lecture series possible and meaningful. Dr. Shouvik Narayan Hore has published numerous essays in national and international journals, most recently in Hyperculture, the Athens Journal of Philology, and the Dibrugarh University Journal of English Studies. He has co-edited 2 books with N.V. Mukhopadhyay, IIT Kharagpur, and Ritushri Sengupta, entitled Thematization of the Goddess in South Asian Cinema and Anger in the 19th Century Critical Perspective 2023, respectively, both published by Cambridge Scholars Publishing. A collection of William Wordsworth is forthcoming. He teaches at the Department of English, the Sanskrit College and University since 2022, and having served as a guest lecturer at Vidyasagar University, India for a year. His essays on English Romantic poets have been referenced in definitive bibliographies like A Year's Work in English Studies, published by Oxford University Press. Today, he will be delivering a lecture on insightful topic Wordsworth today. With this, I once again extend a delightful welcome to you, sir. We are truly honored to have you with this today and look forward to your lecture. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So, should I begin?
Yes, Shouvik, please begin.
Great, wonderful. So, let me also begin by thanking Shivani. I wish you all the best with your research. I am sure you will be doing really well with Dr. Sebastian. But let me first begin by thanking Professor Sangeeta Srivastav, Vice Chancellor of University of Allahabad. Let me proceed and thank Dr. Indrani Mukherjee, Head of the Department of English, and of course, Dr. Aloysius Sebastian, who is an acquaintance, a friend, and an elder brother. More a friend than an acquaintance, and much more than a friend, but an elder brother who made all this possible for us to present our works and so on. My thanks to other members of the Department of English and Modern European Languages for having me here. Thanks to all the students for being here, undergraduate, postgraduate, and research scholars who thought that Wordsworth could benefit us today. I hope I have not fooled you into believing something which is unbelievable or miraculous, but hopefully in my three-part lecture, I might be able to contribute a few thought-provoking questions on why we need to study Wordsworth, what do we mean by today, and where exactly is the intersection in the 20th century between Wordsworth thinking, that is thinking about Wordsworth, and our thinking of philosophy in the 21st century, which contributes to romantic thinking in general. Let me begin by citing an event that happened on March 2026, very recently. That is why I decided to simply title it Wordsworth Today. It was in 2025 that Wordsworth's home, that we now call the Rydal Mount, that was the name that was given by Wordsworth when he moved there from Dove Cottage. So, to put it very briefly, the event is the acquisition of the Rydal Mount by the Wordsworth Trust in collaboration with the Julia Rousing Trust and the Charlotte Aitken Trust. The house had been put up for sale in 2025 because the family was no longer able to look after its expenses. And the house is important to scholars of Wordsworth or scholars of Romanticism because it is a house which Wordsworth built, I would use the word constructed over built, because before that Wordsworth lived in Dove Cottage, and from there he moved to Rydal Mount, the only house that he lived in, to put it simply, in his entire lifetime. And his family, he died there, leaving his sister Dorothy Wordsworth alive and Mary Wordsworth alive. And the house was acquired by the Wordsworth Trust from the Wordsworth family, which initially intended to sell it to a different seller. Of course, what is important in this event is first that it is very recent. The currency of the situation must always remain trapped in our minds. And of course, the house was acquired by the Wordsworth Trust, a non-profit organization. Why this introduction to Wordsworth today by talking about his house and our relationship with Wordsworth House over Wordsworth's poetry? This is where I want to break the two words apart, Wordsworth today, and put a comma between Wordsworth and today. The open-endedness of the topic is gone from this point onwards. The rupture has begun. When I say Wordsworth and a comma and then today, I raise a question. And the interrogation is not simply who is William Wordsworth today, but also what is William Wordsworth today. Two different questions. The question to who is William Wordsworth is a historical question, whereas what is William Wordsworth is a conceptual question. Those questions do not have the same answer. And of course, what is it today? Why are we talking today about the acquisition of the Rydal Mount, and why does it force us to ask a conceptual and historical question at the same time? Of course, all of us are familiar with William Wordsworth. We are familiar with his poetry. We are familiar with his prose. We are familiar with his correspondences and fragments. But we also think of him as the textbook poet of nature. A mistake. I consider that to be a mistake. But is he a textbook poet of nature today, of low and rustic life? An important question that we must ask in order to truly resolve the historical conceptual paradox that we have entered in the current situation. So, who is he? Is he a textbook poet? In the early 1900s, in the late 1800s, Edward Fitzgerald would uh, uh, I would say friskily referred to William Wordsworth as the poet of nature, not the poet but the daddy. So he would often freakishly refer to Wordsworth as Daddy Wordsworth. So are we dealing with a textbook daddy of nature and low and rustic life? Or is he simply a poet who takes us away, who forces us away from urban presences? Because the world today, as we understand it, is a industrial and post-industrial world at the same time. And we are either thinking about the city or thinking of a life away from the city, contrary to Wordsworth's world, which was moving away from the agrarian world into a newly created industrialized ambiance. So, who is William Wordsworth today? Is he the textbook daddy of nature, of low and rustic life, as Edward Fitzgerald would say? Or is he the poet who simply mourns the absences of nature, of the absences in nature, as well as urban presences which function as rural absences? How do we deal with that, and why do we deal with that? Are two questions that we raise. That is the first rupture that I have created within Wordsworth and today. The second rupture that I also want to create is uh, Wordsworth today with a question mark without the comma. Why? Because I believe it has two conceptual implications. First, that there is the simple answer to the question, somewhat monotonous and redundant, but today there is no Wordsworth amongst us. I'm talking about the physical presence of a William Wordsworth. A Wordsworth left us long back, and we are aware, physically aware of his physical absence, with emphasis on the word physical, that he is no longer amongst us to tell us exactly how he should be received today, number one. And of course, the other more playful work on language that we often participate in. Notice that the Rydal Mount was acquired by Wordsworth Trust, a very intelligent choice of name, I would say. But also, if I play on Wordsworth's name himself, can we ask a very different question today? Can we ask if Wordsworth's words are worth today? What is the worth of language, of words, of sounds, of sentences, of meanings today? So are his words worthy today? If they are, they must exist outside the academia, which I think it rarely does, not at least in our country. But if it does exist in the West, it exists more as a protocultural phenomenon than a noumenal ideological fulfillment or manifestation. So, what is the worth of canonical literature today is a question that has been asked before. But if we consider Wordsworth to be alive textually amongst us, then what is the worth of canonical literature in general, and what is the worth of Wordsworth's words today? Both questions need to be asked. Of course, they do not have straightforward answers. And from an Indian perspective, because this is something I value very much, how do we study Wordsworth in natures that are not England? By this, I do not mean how do we study Wordsworth in India, but we must always keep in mind that Wordsworth was writing not for the English but for the British Empire. And India was part of that large British Empire. In fact, Wordsworth in 1836 writes that his poems have been translated into Bangla by Bengalese people. To quote him from Stephen Gill's autobiography of William Wordsworth Alive, he talks about the Bengalese people translating his nature poems, Bengalese people who are not English, and Bengalese people or Indian people who have always been, according to Wordsworth, part of a commonwealth that is England. So, how do we read Wordsworth today and create natures that are not English, that are not Wordsworthian, that are not Rydal Mount? Can we think of a Rydal Mount without Wordsworth, or can we think of a Rydal Mount that is not in England but in the British Empire? So, uh, that leads us, and the reason for this broad understanding is because we have to at the end ask a simple question, sans canon, sans Wordsworth, sans the Wordsworth Trust or the Rydal Mount, the question of what are words worth today? We live in a capitalistic world where everything has a price. And if everything has a price, so does language. And if I cannot understand a poet, then his language is either too expensive for me or it is not worth purchasing. Under those circumstances, how exactly do we regulate the price of language? So, are words worth today? Probably that is where I think the question becomes uh, uh, far more comparable, far more difficult, far more intense than a mere literary or philosophical understanding of the word, as well as the choice of Wordsworth Trust. Of course, the name Wordsworth Trust has a history, which probably I might discuss at a later point. Otherwise, it becomes difficult. But I'll stay on the topic, and I will use the phrase Wordsworth trust in a playful linguistic manner by asking, can we trust William Wordsworth today? Can we trust his words today, or are words worth today? And can we, broadly speaking, trust William Wordsworth today? Also, because all trust, and this is a more philosophical understanding, all trust requires a certain degree of sacrifice, a certain degree of surrendering, of relinquishment, and therefore, what must I, as a non English subject, sacrifice in order to seal the trust of Wordsworth? Believing in Wordsworth's language comes at a cost, and what is the price that the Indian must pay in order to believe the words that Wordsworth had written when he was alive? Because he is not today with us, but the text is very much with us, and of course is very expensive. Prices must always be kept in mind. So, what is the sacrifice we must make in order to make Wordsworth relevant today, or make Wordsworth today? To which, of course, there is no answer. That is why I think this is a perfect topic for comparative literature, because one of the things of comparative literature is it does not look for answers as much as it looks for the hermeneutics of interpretation. So my interpretation of these four questions and one event would be something of this kind, that when I talk about Wordsworth today as an Indian subject, I do not think of myself as a non-British subject, but an Indian subject. As an Indian subject, we are no longer remembering Wordsworth when we are reading Wordsworth today. Let that be clear once and for all, that there is no Wordsworth that we are mourning or remembering as an English subject, number one. But there is a subtle blind spot in that statement. The blind spot being that if I have to trust Wordsworth today, I must acquire or purchase or preserve or protect what belonged to Wordsworth. So that, I think, is an important lesson we learn from the Wordsworth Trust acquiring the Rydal Mount house, because we must purchase what belonged to Wordsworth in order to truly pay the price that Wordsworth demands for us through his texts. So the price that we must pay is the price that we must pay, we continue to pay, is what is returned to us through the text of Wordsworth. We must, in order to appreciate what Wordsworth is today, we must purchase him, and only if we can purchase him at a fair price will Wordsworth impart the lessons that can be imparted to us in his physical presence today. Which leads me to the final point of the first section, that it is important to purchase something before circulating. Otherwise, Wordsworth uh, does not live if I cannot buy him, and if I cannot circulate him after buying him. Think of a Wordsworth library, which is fun because there is a Wordsworth library, Wordsworth Poetry Library. We do call it the Wordsworth Poetry Library. And one must purchase before circulating, and all forms of circulation and reading are ultimately subjugated to the acquisition of what was physically Wordsworth's. That is, without the physical, there is no extra physical, and that which is extra physical is earned through our trust in Wordsworth's text today in his absence. And therefore, what belonged to Wordsworth, I argue, will then belong to us, because he is, and this might be somewhat politically incorrect, but what belonged to Wordsworth will belong to us only when we can pay a price for what uh, Wordsworth wrote or what belonged to him, and he is, in a way, up for sale. Wordsworth today is up for sale, and if we cannot purchase that Wordsworth, then we will not have a Wordsworth today. So having Wordsworth House, or the acquisition of Wordsworth House, is just as important as reading Tintern Abbey or the Prelude or the Lycoris Odes. Which leads me to the second section of our discussion, that when I talk about Wordsworth today, I've already raised 5 questions. We are not talking about a Wordsworth who existed and nobody else. I'm not referring to, of course, his family, which also wrote and wrote well. I'm not talking about Dorothy or Mary or Dora or Edward Cullinan. I'm talking about the Wordsworth that exist within a Wordsworth today. I'm talking about, for lack of time, I have selected only 3 ways in which we can compare Wordsworth with himself, not with somebody else, but a mature understanding of comparison is with what Wordsworth thinks he is endowed with, and whether we can compare him with himself. So what we do today with Wordsworth is compare one version of Wordsworth with other versions of Wordsworth. The 3 most important versions that I have chosen for our lecture today are first, the psychoanalytic Wordsworth, the Wordsworth which was discovered to a great extent by thinkers like Geoffrey Hartman and so on. But of course, Hartman, as he became part of the Yale School, transferred to deconstruction. But I would say Bloom and the other thinkers would play a role. I'll come to that very quickly. I will refer to the books. What did Wordsworth, the psychoanalyst, do? What did Wordsworth, the deconstructive Wordsworth, do for us or not do for us? And what did the new historicist Wordsworth do for us or not do for us? These are the 3 Wordsworth which are existing like split personalities functioning within the same individual. What are they doing to us? And what exactly am I excluding at this point? Because, of course, this is not adequate for a detailed discussion. Let me say for the time being that I'm excluding 2 other Wordsworths, 2 minor versions of Wordsworth, one that we could call an ecological Wordsworth. But my argument here would be that ecology is proto-psychoanalytic, that it has its origins in libido, in our understanding of the philosophy of desire, which is ultimately introjected in and through nature. But it is also followed by, let us say, a post-humanist Wordsworth, which I also argue is a newer version of what I call the deconstructive Wordsworth. So both versions exist. Both exist in difference from each other. But for now, for this discussion, I'll stay put to the 3 Wordsworth that we have found. For the psychoanalytic Wordsworth, I'll use an explanation. I will use Neil Hirsch's The End of the Line, Essays on Psychoanalysis and the Sublime, the first 4 essays on William Wordsworth. For the deconstructive Wordsworth, I have decided to use a book which is called Words, Wish, Worth, Wordsworth by Geoffrey Hartman, who incidentally was also a professor of comparative literature. He was initially part of the Yale School, but he later became the professor of comparative literature at the University of Iowa, if I'm not wrong. He became well known for his works on trauma and partition, the Fortunoff videos on the Holocaust narratives, and so on. Wonderful author. And of course, the new historicist Wordsworth, a Wordsworth that was dug out by the theories of Stephen Greenberg. But the book that I'm using today is by Alan Liu, which is called Wordsworth, The Sense of History. Before I begin this discussion, let me say that in order to properly critique these three comparative Wordsworths floating in front of us, I have chosen just one idea in order to narrow down the lecture to something very particular. And I have chosen, let's say, the history of the sublime. How does psychoanalysis bring out the Wordsworthian sublime, and so on? So what is the sublime? Very briefly, the word sublime is derived from supralimus and sublimis, which means something which rises above the surface. So something which is elevated, and so on, to put it very simply. Now, in the works of Edmund Burke and Immanuel Kant, the sublime is always contrasted against the beautiful. For Edmund Burke, it is a psychological turn. For Immanuel Kant, it is an imaginative and intellectual turn. So aside from that brief difference, I want to very carefully point at the binary that is created between the beautiful and the sublime, that in order for something to be sublime, it has to be beyond the beautiful, so it has to be extra beautiful, it has to be something which transgresses the limits of the beautiful. But to put it conversely, that which does not suit the intellectual turn of the sublime must participate in the smaller miniaturized domain of the beautiful. So in order to define one, we must rely on the excesses or deficits of the other. I will proceed very quickly once again for lack of time, but I would suggest that we could go through probably the Sublime Reader of Robert Lewis and the historical event, because I began with a historical event, keeping the French Revolution in mind, which I will not explain. I am sure my erudite audience knows everything about the French Revolution. Keeping the French Revolution in mind and the sublime as an aesthetic construct used to epistemologize the French Revolution, I'll proceed to the first idea, which is the psychoanalytic Wordsworth. What does it mean? To put it very simply, it means Wordsworth was writing in order to textualize the nature of desire. Number one. So in order to understand desire, one of the things that Wordsworth does is he goes back to the French Revolution, the event of the French Revolution. And one of the things he witnesses in that event, of the many historical events that occurred during the French Revolution, the ascension of Napoleon and his eventual defeat, the fall of the French kings, and so on, and the failure of the coalition, the failure of the Holy Roman Empire, is that violence could never be overcome by theory. And that is something which Wordsworth understood about desire, that desire uses either a theorization, and that theorization overlaps with the historicization of an event. By writing down the event, one looks for a theory, and a theory fails when history fails to follow a narrative which is either linear or non-linear. So in the end of the line by Neil Hertz, we find that Wordsworth discovers his sublimity, his libidinal sublimity, by initiating a blockage in his poetry. How does, to put it very simply, how does one identify what is excess in nature? Wordsworth says, well, the French Revolution ended with the Republicans consuming their own vomit in the prelude, and Wordsworth was able to identify the excess. The moment that excess has been identified, Wordsworth blocks that excess of desire. And one of the two things that Wordsworth does is he channelizes, and represses what is considered to be a physical excess in the understanding of the expression of political desire. Because political desire, as Lyotard will later tell us, is a desire with no ethical validity. I'll come to that in some time. Therefore, what Wordsworth does very intelligently is he expresses his desire by suppressing the French Revolution within himself, two strands of thinking emerge as a result. One is history, the other is theory. By exploring both history and theory in the name of desire, Wordsworth is also trying to reconcile his own childhood with his father's absence, himself with the absence of his mother, and his attachment to Dora Wordsworth as not simply a father's love for the daughter, but the prototypical absence which Wordsworth felt in his own life when he was trying to create a relationship with his own father. So Wordsworth's relationship with Dora was good because Wordsworth's relationship with his father did not exist in a manner of speaking. And that relationship has to be blocked for the father-daughter relationship to emerge theoretically, desirably. So this argument is drawn from the idea of blockage and how exactly does blockage become sublime? Well, to put it in simple ways, the when Wordsworth escapes the French Revolution, he blocks the impulses of the revolution. He leaves behind everything that was his, but at the same time, he cannot do that. One of the things that Wordsworth frequently does during the Treaty of Amiens is he constantly visits the Dover streets in order to see, if possible, what is going on the other side of the English Channel. Of course, he does not want to go there physically, but it is impossible for him not to go there. Therefore, that journey becomes an extra physical journey, and it is made extra physical only by blocking the physical desire which exists in the first place, and this is an indirect acknowledgement of the desire and the suppression of the desire which follows, which leads to the theorization and historicization of a protosexual event, let's say. So I leave it here and move on to the deconstructive Wordsworth. By this I mean that uh, is it possible for us at all to look at Wordsworth uh, as a man who was constantly undoing what he was doing? Uh, as all of you know, Wordsworth began his career as a radical. He believed in Vigory. He believed in the values of the French emperor. He believed in Napoleon. But towards I would say uh, after Napoleon captures Spain and Portugal and attacks Russia and so on, of course they happen over a period of time. Wordsworth becomes a conservative. Wordsworth writes Ode to Duty. From writing the seventh book of the Prelude to transferring to the Ode to Duty and becoming a Kantian is fairly interesting. Something that I think scholars would want to look at is a book called Wordsworth Reading. What did Wordsworth read? And the simple answer to the question is, well, Wordsworth did not read a lot, but what he read, he chose very carefully. Unlike Coleridge, who read everything, uh, Wordsworth chose carefully, and his readings became more and more conservative with further and further references to the Bible and so on. So let us begin with the idea of deconstructive Wordsworth. How can we differentiate between nature, which belongs to all of us, and a nature which is Wordsworth? Because according to deconstruction or deconstructive philosophy, we know that if nature belongs to an individual, or if an individual lays claim to a nature, it no longer remains nature but is transferred into very subtly into culture. So how exactly do I differentiate between nature and Wordsworth nature is a question which ultimately becomes a broader question on whether natures are unwordsworthian and we should not trust them, and whether all Wordsworthian nature is cultural and therefore not nature. Is it possible for us to look at the question in that way? So the point that is raised by Geoffrey Hartman in Words, Wish, Wordsworth in deconstruction and criticism is a simple one. What exactly lies outside Wordsworth? When we think of Wordsworth today, we are immediately faced with a question: what lies outside William Wordsworth? And the answer to the question is, well, we can have any discussion on any subject, but the question, insofar as it has to deal with nature, will come back to Wordsworth. So, what exactly is outside Wordsworth? Everything until the moment of Wordsworth comes, which is inevitable. Therefore, uh, this idea was given the name of paragon, an additional work, an extra, an excess, a supererogatory desire, which exists outside the center, but which is aligned to the center in such a way that it is neither outside nor inside. If we look at it in a different manner, if we change our perspective, we realize that the outside is actually the inside of an outside, that there is no true outside. So when we talk about Wordsworth's nature, we are talking about a culture which is inside the domain of a nature that Wordsworth created, but also created in such a way that the binary itself can always be understood through the terms of center and not center, marginalized or non-marginalized, beautiful or sublime. Precisely at what point does the French Revolution act as a paragon in the Wordsworthian sublime? To which the answer is, you often find in Wordsworth the broad idea that it is possible for us to understand the uh, it is possible for us to understand that the Wordsworth who writes about the French Revolution is actually trying to unwrite or rewrite it. And in the process of rewriting the French Revolution, he either moves closer to how he wanted the French Revolution to go like, or a movement away from the French Revolution, believing that no revolution physically conducted is a practicable revolution. Why is it that way? Because Wordsworth is always, I argue, outsiding himself, that it does not exist in him. Compared to the psychoanalytic Wordsworth, this Wordsworth is, I think, much more intelligent and always distancing himself in a broader fashion. So the question remains, in Wordsworth, can we determine if it is Wordsworth who is sublime because he uses a language that he projects outside himself? Think of a simple poem like Tintin Abbey. Everything happens, everything is well and fine, hunky dory, and all of a sudden he reminds, oh, I'm sorry, I almost forgot. Dorothy was with me too. So what is Dorothy supposed to do? Well, Dorothy can always spread the message that I have created. Not her own message. I mean, she can. But the actual purpose of Tintin Abbey is to consider Dorothy as somebody outside Wordsworth. And then when Wordsworth gives her the lesson of nature, she comes inside Wordsworth. So this strange movement of moving outside and coming inside, man and woman, gender, uh, beautiful and sublime, philosophy and comparability. All these things are, in my argument, sublime, because sublime is both an experience and action conducted and a pedagogy communicated. So both work together in order to convey broadly why the deconstructive Wordsworth is something that we cannot leave behind, the same way that we cannot truly leave Derrida behind, or Hartman, or Harold Bloom behind, McFarland as well. So the third point here is the new historicist Wordsworth, a Wordsworth which has now evolved or devolved into culture studies, a world where we say that, to put it in very simple words, as Alan Lew says, that history begins when you ask a person who is standing beside you, how is the weather? Which is a wonderful way of beginning a conversation, which means I do not want to know the weather. I already know how it is. It is hot and sultry, but I want to talk about something, but I'm not prepared to do it. It is in that brief space that all history works. A conversation that cannot be conducted, a conversation that is always stuck between the interdictic text and the ideologizing text. So what is the weather is a wonderful way of looking at Wordsworth, because Wordsworth is a poet, as Professor Pramod K. Nair would tell us. Aloysius knows that better than I do as well. Wordsworth is a poet who is always giving us weather updates. He is always telling us the weather is like this, Tintin Abbey is like this place is like this, and that place is like that. Having fun with weather, and when he is bored, he moves to philosophy and says, "Okay, I'm done for the day." Okay, so this is important because Wordsworth is trying to create, through the evocation of a place, a history which does not exist, and this is precisely where we say, as not I but Alan Lew says, that Wordsworth is accidentally making a history which nature did not have. And when Wordsworth is writing about the weather, Wordsworth is creating two texts, and within those texts, he has accidentally created a history which does not exist textually. Why does he do that? Because, strangely enough, for Wordsworth, as I have mentioned, if you compare Wordsworth with other nature poets, you often see that nature for Wordsworth is an event. Something happens in nature. Wordsworth says, well, something happened, I was there, I saw it, I understood it better than you would, because of course I am the romantic poet and you are not. Of course, I'm exaggerating a bit here, but also an episode is different from an event. So Wordsworth takes an episode from nature, he makes the poem look like an event, and after the event has been created, Wordsworth infuses it with the weather, which is to say, this is the weather of my mind, and this weather of my mind must now exist in tandem with the weather of the so-called episode, which I call nature, and the entire event takes upon itself a sublime afterglow. This afterglow is what Wordsworth talks about as the sublime gift, and the gift that he believed he had and Coleridge did not, because he often referred to Coleridge's sublimity as a form of mock sublimity, that he was a man who never experienced what he saw. Well, what was that? Well, he never experienced the weather. And if you do not experience the weather, you can never be face to face with the sublime. You cannot resist what you cannot encounter. To put it in very simple ways, we encounter today because we are resisting the past and imagining a future. So two things are happening in order for one thing to happen right now and properly. Which leads me to a wonderful quotation that I thought I should share with you aside from the weather argument, because we are comparing three Wordsworths today, now. In fact, now is today. So, in a chapter on Wordsworth's tour of Scotland, of course, he says, without history in the background, a landscape is not a landscape, it is wilderness. I'll repeat that. Without history in the background, a landscape is not a landscape, it is wilderness. So it is Wordsworth who infuses history, or as I like to call it, how is the weather, in order to make wilderness more than just a forest with plants and trees and animals and gibbons. And by infusing the human, he elevates himself before everybody else, and therefore a third form of sublimity is born within Wordsworth, a sublimity which consciously blunts the consequences of the French Revolution, because often, as we find, Wordsworth compares the soldiers in the French Revolution, their deaths, and so on, with animal deaths. He often compares them with animals who die, who are slaughtered without a name, they have no identity, and they disappear the way they came to the world. So this Wordsworth deals with this tension by, in a way, occluding the event itself and invoking a weather in which Wordsworth is comfortable in. So a French Revolution in England without the French weather. However bad that sounds, but probably that is what makes the French Revolution sublime in Wordsworth's eyes, which leads me to the final section. When we have talked about Wordsworth today, we have already introduced what I like to call a comparative Wordsworth, a Wordsworth who doesn't exist. So comparative Wordsworth is essentially Wordsworths. So in today's world, we are dealing with a minimum of 3 and a maximum of 5, I argue. And what exactly is a comparative Wordsworth? Now, the reason why I chose this particular title is because what I have tried to share through the references of the books and so on is that we are concerned with the way in which we treat language. In psychoanalysis, we treat language as a form of desire. In deconstruction, we treat language as an unstable entity and unstable identity. And in new historicism, we treat language as a weather phenomenon. It can change. It is like this one moment, and the next moment it will change. All three unstable things are stabilized, I argue, in at a later point in time when Lyotard is talking about, Jean-Francois Lyotard is talking about the French Revolution in a book which all of you are familiar with. It is called Différend. The book is called simply Différend, written in the 1960s. To what extent, the question here is, to what extent is this comparative Wordsworth or Wordsworth today Lyotard, or to what extent is postmodernism, although we are not in a postmodern world, but for the sake of the argument, let us say, go back 10 years and say, to what extent is postmodernism today vis-a-vis Lyotard Wordsworthian? So one question asked in two ways and can only be answered in one way. At this point, I take away all the complications that I have created through the Wordsworth Trust and trusting Wordsworth and so on. In Différend, what Lyotard says paves the way for a Wordsworthian sublime without the burden of Wordsworth. What is that? In a particular section on the sublime, Lyotard says that during the French Revolution, all political historical enthusiasm, please note the word enthusiasm is associated with sublimity. Enthusiasm was how John Dennis saw sublimity, how Nicholas Boileau saw sublimity, not redundancy or tautology, but enthusiasm. So all political historical enthusiasm during the French Revolution has no ethical validity, which means all revolution without its adequate psychoanalytic or deconstructive or new historicist reconstructions in Wordsworth's critics or Wordsworth's minds of the many Wordsworths that we have had is not valid until we know whether they are good or bad. Without their ethical validity, without their authenticity, they do not exist. And insofar as we cannot read them as things not existing, we have to force them to participate in a linguistic manner within texts. And it is this compelling, I would say, this forcible manner of infusing the French Revolution with language, where Wordsworth comes in, where the idea of the sublime comes in, and Lyotard comes in, because Lyotard tells us that political historical enthusiasm has no ethical validity. It is not sublime. But blockages, supplements, paragons, and history, weathers, and so on are language games which transfer the unsublimity in the French Revolution to the sublimity in text. We transfer the failed nature of the French Revolution to the successful manifestation of that sublime in, let's say, a broader proto-European form of sublimity, a sublimity that was initially shared by both England and Germany. I've already mentioned Edmund Burke and Immanuel Kant. Edmund Burke was 22 or 23 when he was writing his reflections, although this was in 1757, but Immanuel Kant was writing after the French Revolution. That is something we could note. So with Lyotard, everything becomes a game when we realize that the French Revolution must be blocked in the same way that Wordsworth blocked the French Revolution, and Lyotard is becoming Wordsworthian. So in a postmodern world, we could say that literature holds meaning when the history of the French Revolution becomes in philosophy a source of ethical epistemology, the desire to know or not know, the desire to choose whether to be sublime or not sublime. And it is in this transfer of political historical enthusiasm to textual enthusiasm that we place our comparative Wordsworth. And this is the mind of William Wordsworth, I argue, during the French Revolution, and conveyed to us through Lyotard, through language, into a newer world. Not one Wordsworth, but three Wordsworth constantly in conflict with each other, creating a comparative Wordsworth, thanks to Lyotard. And thanks to all of you.
Thank you very much, Shouvik, for such a very enlightening session. So generally, nowadays, when we do Wordsworth studies, we try to simplify him too much by focusing upon just the romantic aspects, non-political aspects, and by just looking upon him as a nature poet. So what you have actually done through this lecture is that you have taken all the participants to other discourses on Wordsworth, which are generally ignored in literature classrooms. And that is exactly where comparativist perspective comes into this lecture, and claims and thus has a lot of significance as far as the scope of this workshop is concerned. So now we invite the participants to raise questions and queries to the resource persons and observations as well. Participants? We have our former professor from the department, Professor Sanjoy Datta Roy. We are very glad to have you here, sir. So what do you think about the lecture? Do you have any observations or anything to make?
Yeah, thank you, Aloysius, for inviting me for this. It's been listening to Shouvik, right? I just had one observation, and I would like to hear what Shouvik had to say about it regarding Wordsworth. And that is, that Wordsworth also attempted a poetic autobiography, independent, right? Where he tried to create a kind of identity for himself, which actually deconstructs itself in the process of that creation. Would you agree with that? Or do you think that maybe what I'm saying is too far-fetched?
No, what you are saying is exactly right. You are mentioning autobiography or memoranda, which Wordsworth attempted to write, but I strongly feel that Wordsworth could not have written it, because how can I deconstruct myself is a huge question. How can I talk about myself? Central to all understanding of an author is not that his writings are an evocation, but that their writings are a withdrawal from their own self. So when Wordsworth sits down to write his autobiography, what he does is he forces a side of him, which is he projects an element of him that is not him. He does not talk about his relationship with his French affairs and so on. That would take Legui, Casimir, and other thinkers at a later point to bring out that no, Wordsworth is not the saint he pretends to be. But Wordsworth never pretended to be a saint. That is my point. What we do as thinkers of Wordsworth and what we and when I say that we are thinkers of Wordsworth, we place ourselves in Wordsworth's place and do the exact same thing by withdrawing from what we originally think.
Yes.
So all acts of writing an autobiography is ultimately a projection of one's self, which I was not. And thankfully, Wordsworth did not have enough time to finish the memoranda because others did it for him, and it turned out to be far, far better than how Wordsworth would have done it for himself. But jovial moments apart, I think that Wordsworth did want to leave behind something that others could write about him. I'm thinking about Isabella Fenwick's notes. I'm thinking about his postcard entries where he constantly experiences an embarrassment and guilt, not because he has not accomplished what he set out to accomplish, but because it was impossible for Wordsworth to transfer the entirety of the suffering of French Revolution into poetry, which would have satisfied his own psychological and spiritual requirements. That is why in a poem as beautiful as Nothing, we find that the Wordsworth we like is also a Wordsworth who enjoys nature, but at a certain point he loses his mind. A bipolarity hits him, and suddenly he starts breaking all the branches of the trees and he feels guilty. He would rather feel guilty for doing something bad than die innocent. In a way, he is also participating in a French Revolution where he claims he was not part of, but he was. One does not have to take a sword in order to fight a war. So, yes, Wordsworth's attempt at autobiography memoranda failed, thank God. But that also teaches us how Wordsworth was trying to revise himself as often as he could. And of course, we are thankful to him that he failed, but we are also thankful to him that he tried.
Yeah, and the failure is evident actually in the final portion of the prelude, and that is where it collapses actually. Right?
Yes, it does. Exactly. It never ends, it collapses.
Yeah, that's the thing.
Exactly.
Right?
I absolutely agree with you there. The imagination is never restored, it simply ends. Please, I'm done with the poem, can you please end? I would prefer to begin a different poem. Of course, that is not how it went down. But yes, Wordsworth was not writing the prelude because he wanted to write the prelude. He wanted to write the recluse. And he could not write the recluse because writing the recluse was an impossible task. It was Coleridge's burden on Wordsworth's shoulders that he could not have handled. So Wordsworth could argue with the many Wordsworth in him, but not with the Coleridges. So he had to give that up. Once again, thankfully.
Yeah. That's right. Fine. Yeah, that's good.
Anyone else? Ma'am, would you like to say something? Indrani ma'am, head of the department. Yeah, yes, Raj, you're most welcome. You may speak. You may raise your query.
Hey, am I audible?
You are audible. You are audible.
I can hear you. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, sir. So I had a few questions, but I would try to summarize them as quickly as I can, and hope that they make sense. Uh, First, I would like to know what drew you to Wordsworth, because as a canonized literary figure, he's very much uh, a lot is already written about him, and I think it's much difficult to come up with interpretations for him now, outside of his life context and outside of the context he was born in, outside of, like you said, sublimity and everything else. Do you think that the canonization of Wordsworth is because of his literariness, or do you think that the later biographies or the portions left behind by Dorothy Wordsworth and other and the context we know about him, it led to his canonization? Or do you think that simply by his work, uh, simply by reading his work, uh, we could have judged him worthy for the this canonized
Okay, okay.
in academic sense status? So,
Both questions are good. Yes.
secondly, I wanted to ask that
Mhm.
in this contemporary time, because we are in because we're such a chaotic let's say a state with the internet, because fads and trends, literary movements are very tough to track down right now. So there is not as much we'll say universalism in poets work as of right now, as we would find in later, like 2 or 3 centuries back. So do you think that do you think that this this sort of canonization of poets that we've been doing for a while, do you think that that's possible in internet era, or as we progress? Because like I said, it's very much harder to keep track of literary movements and persons and their biographies and whatnot, and credible sources as well, as now that AI has come up. I hope I'm making sense.
Yes, yes. Let me answer one question at a time. What drew me to William Wordsworth?
Yes, sir.
I, I, let me be very honest with you. I could not give you an answer. I do not think a Wordsworth would be able to answer what drew him to nature. That is why he continuously kept asking uh, about nature. What is nature? What does nature do? What is dark and light in nature? These are very fundamental questions. They require a metaphysical framework which are abstract, which can be believable, which can be trusted. But of course, to trust the poet and the evocative nature of all interpretation is very difficult. So, what drew me to Wordsworth? Probably what drew me to Wordsworth is what drew Geoffrey Hartman to Wordsworth, or what drew John Stuart Mill to Wordsworth. Uh, we live in a world, or let me say, even Hartman lived in a world, let me say, Mill lived in a world which was becoming more private, which was becoming more individualistic, which was becoming more urban, which means a space, the question of space was being raised, and with more and more constrictions of space, we realized that what we could not physically acquire, we had to mentally take note of. I think that is what led John Stuart Mill to study William Wordsworth, because his father, the historian James Mill, uh, wanted his son to be an intellectual, but he believed that he was emotionally drained, and without the emotional nourishment, he would not survive. We read suicidal John Stuart Mill in his autobiography. So all of us have their reasons. Geoffrey Hartman came all the way from Europe during the Holocaust and settled in the States, acquired a PhD, wrote almost the entirety of his life on Wordsworth. We each are drawn to Wordsworth in different ways. We have an event that we can relate to, but that event cannot be historicized. And even if I pretended to tell you that there is one thing which led me to Wordsworth, I would be lying. So after 7 years of MPhil and PhD and God knows what, I have still not asked myself the question, What drew me to Wordsworth? I accept the fact that I am drawn to Wordsworth and I leave it at that. I think that is the way we should deal with life. Accept and move on. Okay, so that is the first way in which we could deal with it. The second question which you asked is a wonderful question. The question on deconstruction, the question on paragon. You said whether we read Wordsworth because of Wordsworth or because of Dorothy and Mary and Sarah Coleridge and Isabella Fenwick or because of other people? Is it because of people around Wordsworth that we read Wordsworth, or is it because of Wordsworth that we read Wordsworth? The question is very good. If I put it in a theoretical framework, it is a deconstructive question. It is a question of whether it is Wordsworth who we read, or is it others who force us to read Wordsworth? So the answer is both. Your professors, including me, would probably force you to read a bit of Wordsworth in your UG and your PG. But after that, whether you wish to read Wordsworth or not, it's entirely up to you. So deconstruction, as I have said, posits a binary. There is an outside which is always functioning outside William. But that outside almost entirely defines what William Wordsworth should be inside. If you let me draw another example, because I mentioned deconstruction. Let me cite an example. You are probably familiar with Foucault's Madness and Civilization, and probably you are also familiar with Derrida's essay on Cogito and the History of Madness. The first line in Derrida's essay, in the book form, is "I will allow," as Foucault says, "I will let madness speak." You see, the moment you allow madness to speak is also the moment when you are saying nonsense. You are uttering things which cannot truly be understood, because that is precisely what madness is. Madness is something inarticulable. If you try to articulate what is inarticulable, then what is articulable as a result becomes more and more inarticulable. So can we exist in a world where two inarticulations coexist? Or is it better if we articulate something so that we can repress the inarticulable? We cannot know for sure. So once again, what led to our canonization of Wordsworth? Wordsworth himself, that is true. People around Wordsworth also played a massive role in the canonization of Wordsworth. Tennyson adored William Wordsworth. Robert Browning mourned William Wordsworth in the Lost Leader. We have William Watson writing poetry on Wordsworth's graves. We have on Wordsworth's grave. We have Matthew Arnold writing his memorial verses on Wordsworth. So we have people, Thomas Carlyle writing on Wordsworth. We have Ralph Waldo Emerson visiting Wordsworth from the Americas, all the way to England, talking to him and coming back in the 1830s and so on. So what led to the canonization of Wordsworth? This is a very difficult question, but it is true that Wordsworth is more than the question of who did it. I think a better question is whether Wordsworth was canonizable. And the answer to the question is a big yes. We have stopped reading Wordsworth, but Wordsworth has not stopped reading us, which means Wordsworth has always had the capacity for being canonized, and it is the canonizability, the comparability that we enjoy and spread amongst others. I'm spreading with you and you are spreading with me. That is more important than what Wordsworth and the people around Wordsworth wanted. As far as the third question goes, yes, we live in a world where there is a lot of weathers. So to come back to the new history studies, as you say, there is so much that sometimes the canon is dimmed, it is benighted. And I agree with you entirely. There are so many weathers around us. The weathers around social media, the weathers around politics, the weathers around epistemologies, philosophies, morality, psychology. God knows how many there are. Even I do not know. I have already mentioned ecological Wordsworth and post-humanist Wordsworth. So you can imagine how many more we live to see. Which one should be canonizable? We cannot know. But more importantly, it is true that of the many weathers that exist, there is the possibility for a climate. And we can never discount the possibility of a climate forming itself despite the manifold weathers that surround us. So is it possible for us to create a climate around Wordsworth in the current situation? A big yes. Yes, we are doing it right now and we will continue to do it. But is it possible for us to remove all the weathers that sideline Wordsworth? Yes. There are weathers which are actively resisting the canon, but I believe that climates can absorb all weathers, and there will be a center that we will probably enjoy, study, read, materialize, academize at the end of the century, and some things will exist at the corners. So, to be very, and this is a more of a naughty answer, but let me say this, that we know that 1798 is the year when Wordsworth published his lyrical ballads. Not many of us know that in 1798, Mary Wollstonecraft published Mary or the Wrongs of Woman, Maria or the Wrongs of Woman, because we considered that to be a feminist tract, which was less important than the publication of the lyrical ballads. Did it happen? Yes. Were the two weathers operating at the same time? Yes. Did we choose one as a climate? Absolutely. But did we forget the other one? Absolutely not. We remember it, we write about it, we exist in it. So yes, both will continue to exist, but a climate will form it. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, sir. Beautiful answer, sir. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Sir, there is a question in chat box. Please elaborate.
Can you please read the question, because I cannot access the chat box?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Please elaborate. Violence would never overcome by theory. Violence would never overcome by theory. What is theory here? And why desire constitutes history and theory?
What I meant was that violence can be overcome by theory, not that violence cannot be overcome. Violence cannot be overcome when you refuse to leave the event of the French Revolution. Violence can be overcome when there is a critical distance created between the site of physical violence and the site of intellectual or spiritual violence. So violence is overcome by theory, but theory is not a substitute for violence. That is what I meant. Theories will exist in order for us to know, but knowledge is not an excuse for aphysicality, aethicality. That is not a possibility, but all violence is overcome by theory in the sense that a critical distance can be created between the physicality of the act, the epistemological blindness that is created through the physicality, and our later retrospection of the event, and a final separation from the violence into the creation of a civilization, which is England in this case.
I would like to take a minute to thank Dr. Shouvik Narayan for sharing his views with us. Thank you very much. And special thanks to Professor Shankar Datta for joining us today for our workshop.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Yeah.
Are there more questions?
It seems there is one more question. I think this can be the final question. Yes, Mukta, you may raise a question.
Hello, good evening, everyone who are present here. Sir, I wanted to ask one question. I wanted your opinion on this. Do you think that literature is the last stand for metaphysics? Because in philosophy, it has died in all of that.
Literature is the last stanza of metaphysics. Do I believe in it? You want my opinion? Yes. Thank you for speaking my opinion after so long. I almost thought my opinion didn't matter, of course. Okay, so I think the question that you have raised is a difficult one, but I think I can answer that because you want my opinion and not an estimate. So thank you for that. Let me say that it is impossible for us to imagine a literature without metaphysics. Number one, metaphysics is a site for violence, and all violence requires an event. All events require an episode, and literature provides us literature in the way it is created. I want to go back to the etymology of the word literature. It is nothing but a game of letters. We play with letters in such a way that it takes on meaning which it would not had it not become literature. So what is the arrangement, or what is the arbitrary arrangement of letters but metaphysics? So we are, whenever we are doing literature, we are arranging words in a metaphysical fashion that makes sense to us and to you, to the community, to everybody around us. So is literature the last site of metaphysics? Because philosophy is today broadly divided between continental philosophy and analytic philosophy. And the philosophy that we discussed is the philosophy more or less of literary criticism, what I like to call the philosophy of literature, the application of philosophical ideas to literature when the philosophy departments have almost entirely abandoned continental philosophy. Is literature the last point where metaphysics can strike? Well, if you go back to Plato, you find that Plato finds it impossible to talk in his dialogues without references from Homer. It is almost impossible for us to imagine a Plato in his Aeon and his Phaedrus and his Apology without Socrates quoting randomly from Homer, sometimes from the Iliad and sometimes from the Odyssey. Why does he do that? Well, Plato is writing a critique of poetry, and he believes that a critique of poetry is an arrangement of words which is metaphysics, which cannot be fulfilled without poetry. Without literature, let's say, let me call it Homer's poetry. Literature has always been at the thresholds of metaphysics. It was literature that gave birth to metaphysics, but it is metaphysics which, as the now grown adult child, which is rejecting its mother, literature, on multiple occasions. We have seen metaphysics saying we do not need poetry. We see Plato saying we do not need poetry in Book 9 and 10 of the Republic. Does Plato believe in what he says? Well, of course, there are people who say that Plato believes in what he says. I'm of the opinion that Shelley knows that Plato knows that it is impossible not to believe in poetry. Hence the defense of poetry. Because Plato believed in poetry, but Plato also believed that it is possible to misinterpret poetry as a site of violence which is beyond linguistics. So that becomes a huge problem for us as individuals to confuse poetry as linguistic violence and poetry as metaphysical violence. So is literature the last point? Well, at some point, I think metaphysics will have to renew its relationship with literature. Will it be successful? Let us see if the weather clears. If the weather clears, we might probably see whether the climate of literature agrees with the climate of metaphysics. If it does, then we can celebrate once again with Wordsworth of tomorrow. If not, then I'm sure it will happen sooner or later. So literature and metaphysics' relationship will never have a beginning and an end. It will never have a hierarchy. But yes, it will be always a site of conflict, of tension, of constant dealing with anxiety. It will always be psychoanalytic. It will always remain deconstructive and new historicist. We will have to come to terms with the pseudo-personalities formed as a result of our world expanding.
Thank you, sir. Amazing answer. And thank you so much for such an enriching session.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Yes,
Glad
Dr. Shouvik, it was really such an enriching session. And regarding the lecture, as well as the way that you answered the questions, it was very substantial, very well substantiated with very comprehensive references, appropriate references, and with a lot of clarity regarding each and every idea that you were discussing. So it was really impressive. Thank you so much. So now yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you
for having me.
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, please unmute yourself. Yes, ma'am. Yes. All right.
Last but not the least, let me thank Dr. Aloysius for taking this wonderful initiative, which has helped us to collaborate and interact with scholars all over. Thank you very much.
And many thanks to Professor Indrani Mukherjee, the head of the department, because I would not have been able to conduct this seminar without her support. It is only because she supported me from the beginning that I was able to organize this without any delay and on time. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Professor Mukherjee. Thank you so much. I hope we'll meet again. Thank you so much.
So now I invite the vote of thanks to be delivered by Prajwal. Prajwal, please. Thanks.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. It was a meticulously prepared and well-argued session. I extend my heartfelt thanks to our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Sangeeta Srivastava, for her visionary leadership, which continues to inspire our academic excellence. And I am also equally grateful to Professor Indrani Mukherjee, the head of the Department of English and Modern European Languages, for her unwavering support and guidance in making this session possible. I would like to express a sincere thanks to the distinguished speaker, Dr. Shouvik Narayan Hore, whose insightful deliberation truly has brought to attention the comparative ways of looking at Wordsworth in the contemporary times. My special thanks goes to the coordinator, Dr. Aloysius Sebastian, for his planning and seamless execution of the session. I am also thankful to Shivani for her thoughtful introduction. I express our sincere regards for the technical team, without whose support these proceedings of the sessions would not have been smooth. Finally, I thank all the faculty members, professors, and all the attendees for their presence and engagement, which really made this session truly beautiful and enriching. Thank you all. Good night.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, man.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much to the technical team as well. All the research scholars and the students have been helping me out with this. So again, thank you so much, Shouvik. See you again.
We'll meet again. Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Sir, someone is requesting for email. Okay then.
Bye, Shivani.